Suan Hausing from the University of Hyderabad. Professor, thanks for joining us. Now, the groups are said in Manipur to have coexisted rather peacefully in recent years, and that's despite having a long history of very deep-running ethnic tensions. So why is the government particularly concerned about this round of violence?
Angela, thank you for having me on board. I think the report that you have just highlighted need to be rectified because it does not square up with the local reports there. Because the chief minister, unfortunately, has become the major source of spreading falsehood as well as lies. Because as you'd see from the ground reports, there are hardly any militants killed. In fact, the state, in complicity with armed groups based in the valley, have conducted a series of offensive strikes against Kokizo communities in the foothills, which led to retaliatory attacks against such combined operations in the foothills. So that is precisely where I think the contest of narrative happens.
And despite what all this has been said, the chief minister has told local media that the latest round of conflict is not between the communities, but actually between militants and security forces. So who are these militants and what do they want? Can you make sense of this narrative for us?
Again, this has to be nuanced because, you see, it's not a fight between the state and the militants. It is, in effect, the fallback or the blowback of some of these village volunteers who, in fact, defended their homeland, as it were, right? So the kind of official narrative that we get to hear from Imphal, from the Chief Minister's office, is that this violence is as if it is enacted between the state and the militants, which is not the case.
And let's talk a bit more about the wider ramifications of the conflict. The Manipur government has told the Supreme Court last week that the birth of the ethnic violence was the crackdown on poppy cultivation and also drug trafficking by illegal immigrants from Myanmar. So in this case, how should India revisit its policy to Myanmar so as to maintain these bilateral ties and also make sure that its own backyard is not affected by these ethnic conflicts?
I think let us understand this for a fact that, the narrative that is built around that poppy cultivators or, drug lords or illegal immigrants coming out from the Myanmar side have unleashed violence on the state and question and interrogate the territorial integrity of Manipur is also a bit misplaced because, as you would see, that this recent, influx of population from Myanmar happened in the wake of the February 2021 coup in Myanmar. But none of these, people who are into Manipur have established village settlements. So in that sense, it is also a kind of false narrative that is built around. But I think the state, the state as well as the government of India has to really seriously think in terms of its refusal to be a signatory to the UN Convention on Refugee. In fact, until and unless you have that, you do not have, a kind of legitimate basis to deal with influx of immigrants across the border.
In this case, if the conflict ends up being a long stalemate, what would the prolonged instability mean for the country?
I think there are a set of issues. One of the things that I have highlighted in my earlier published articles is that Biren Singh apparently is playing with fire, and he used a very radicalized armed organization, the Arambai Tengol and the Meitei Lipund, to push his integrationist as well as majoritarian drive, which in effect is dangerous because the Arambai Tengol and the Meitei Lipund, which are used apparently by the chief minister for his short-term electoral gains, have anti-India, anti-Hindu as well as anti-Hindi radical agenda. And in that sense, it is going to be a grave internal threat to the territorial integrity of India. That is precisely why I think the set of the Indian state have to really seriously think reimposing Armed Force Special Powers Act in the valley areas to flush out this armed radicalized militant organization in order to establish a semblance of peace and stability. And I also feel that it's now about time that the central government seriously think about, imposing president rule, given that the chief minister has not mended his ways the Chief Minister has been thoroughly incapable in establishing law and order.
And let's talk a bit about what the government is doing as well. Then, it's worth noting that Manipur has not had internet connectivity for nearly a month now, so there's not much flow of information. And also, 70,000 displaced security forces are now out on the streets. What are some things you feel the government should be doing in addition to all this when it comes to handling the situation?
I think one of the ways that the government should be doing is that instead of identifying something like 38 sensitive foothill areas where these armed personnel from the central forces are deployed, they should also seriously think about reinforcing, armed deployment in the hills, which in effect have converted into the major offensive targets of the state, as well as armed radicalized groups in the valley areas. That's one. The second thing which I think the state as well as the Indian state should seriously consider is that it should reimpose Armed Force Special Powers Act in the valley areas. Remember that Armed Force Special Powers Act have been withdrawn from the valley areas because of a long-standing protest and demand for such withdrawal. But in the hill areas, we have in place the Armed Force Special Powers Act, which, however, on both fronts, have not been very successful in containing the spread and intensity of violence. But the central government should also now seriously think about its policy framework by imposing Armed Force Special Powers in the valley areas as well.
Professor, thank you so much for your insights. So we were just speaking with Professor Kham Suan Hausing from the University of Hyderabad.